And he had got past the initial stages, and he was in an advanced stage of it. So he was getting very good at combining different sounds from his synthesizers together and together and together and together, and even putting things like cowbells through at the same time. Or he had built this rather interesting instrument, which was a piece of wood with paper clips stuck into it. So there was all these paper clips, they're all various heights, and if you prong them, put them through the synthesizer, it made this weird sound. I don't think he actually recorded that for Roxy Music, but he was interested in making new types of instruments.
By the end of 1972, having conquered the UK, Roxy took their inimitable show to America. Advance word had travelled across the Atlantic, and the US press were eagerly awaiting not only the band's iconic frontman, Brian Ferry, but the unique visual and musical presence of Eno.
Roxy Music was hot as a firecracker from the get-go. If I'm not mistaken, the first time I ever saw them, it certainly is something I remember, they initially opened for another Warner Brothers band, Jethro Tull, at Madison Square Garden. And there was this whole phalanx of rock critics, and there weren't so many of us at this time, so say a dozen people at least that I knew. We get to Madison Square Garden at 8 o'clock sharp. They put on their 32-minute opening act. We cheer, we look at Eno all the time because he is the visual center of the show as much as Brian Ferry. They go off, we all get up and leave. whole row gone. We just wanted to see this band.
Not only were the US press primed for the spectacle of Eno, but also for his growing fame. Articulate and relaxed, he had become a much sought-after interviewee, while his notorious sexual antics on the road were making him an unlikely icon, and his profile was beginning to eclipse that of frontman Ferry. Roxy toured with support from blues guitarist Lloyd Watson, who was a witness to Eno's embracing of the rock and roll lifestyle.
Me and Eno, we sort of got a bit of a reputation as the looners in the party, as it were. Well, it was the age of the Polaroid camera at that time, so of course there'd be girls in the dressing room, and Eno would be snapping, and then in the morning showing us his collection. Yeah, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this now. And also, like the song "The Fat Lady of Limburg" is an actual experience of a night in a hotel room when I had, on that time, I would say it was the misfortune to be in the next bed on my own and not able to sleep because of what was going on. But it's rock and roll, isn't it?
There was a lot of photographs of Brian, surrounded by lots of women. He was getting a lot of attention that way, and he relished that attention. He thought it was fantastic. Once he was asked what were his interests in life, my only interest in Roxy are sex and music. So he was saying what people felt. I think, it may sound a bit strange, but I think Brian Ferry has always come across as quite a shy person, and someone who actually doesn't like socializing and talking outside the fantasy which he made in Roxy music. I think as a person he seems quite shy and very self-conscious, where Eno wasn't self-conscious.
When Eno went to America, they all loved him. He gave good copy, and he was a natural entertainer. He was incredibly garrulous, and he talked to any journalist. Ferry was more elitist. Even his choice of women seemed elitist. When he did get involved, it was with fashion models. You got the impression Eno'd sleep with anybody, was always the impression you get. Even on that level, there was a distinction between them.
The band returned to the studio in February 1973, and the resultant LP, For Your Pleasure, was greeted even more enthusiastically than their debut. During the recording, Eno began to take a more active role in the studio, and was able to imbue the album with inspiration he was taking from the new sounds emerging from the flourishing but little-known German experimental scene of the time.
On For Your Pleasure, Brian does become more involved in the production process, definitely more so than the first album, which was recorded really fast. They had much more time on the second one. Apart from anything else, he started to make notes about different ways of approaching the recording studio, some of which would have significance for him later on. I remember him saying something about, if you listen to the studio playback from outside the control room, you picked out only so many frequencies, and you could hear it in a completely different way, and sometimes gave him great ideas for mixing. He also, on the track The Bogus Man, he had a lot of impact on that one, and it was influenced by Can, particularly. And he brought that kind of German, what later became known as krautrock, sensibility to that track in particular. It does have this metoric quality. Ferry was kind of drifting towards the orthodox, to the classic, and Eno was definitely wanting to put more of the avant-garde into Roxy music, and that album, For Your Pleasure, is perhaps a very finely balanced version of these two things, you know, kind of keeping each other in equilibrium, and that's perhaps why it's, for many people, the finest Roxy album.
Yet despite the success of For Your Pleasure, the equilibrium found on the album between the clashing personalities of Eno and Ferry could not be sustained elsewhere. Not only were they disagreeing about the direction of the band, but a power struggle had developed. As they hit the road, Eno had become such a draw in his own right that a baying crowd would chant his name throughout the set, while a neglected Ferry was continually having to remind the press that he was in fact the brains behind the outfit and the sole songwriter, and not his flamboyant colleague. Yet any confusion came to an end while promoting the new album, as Ferry chose to step out from behind his piano and on stage became the focal point.
Ferry founded the group, and it's the same with anybody, like with Brian Jones. He formed the Stones and then finds himself getting marginalised. I mean, it didn't happen to that extent with Brian Ferry because he was the vocalist, so he was always in the forefront, but the attention wasn't always going that way. It was sometimes going there, oh, and let's see what Eno's doing, and oh, he's singing, we better get back and look at him now. So I think that's just about how it was, yeah.
There's a new sensation, a fabulous creation, a danceable solution to teenage revolution.
Once Ferry took centre stage, Eno's flamboyance and his role as the clown of the group, but also the genius of the group, is thrust somewhat into the background. And so what's he left with? You know, once Ferry took centre stage, then they become a much more traditional group. It didn't look so odd on stage. It was the right thing to do. The management wanted Ferry to be centre stage, but then it becomes increasingly to look like Brian Ferry and Roxy music as opposed to just Roxy music. And that's the direction it started going in.
They're playing our tune by the pale moon. We're incognito down the Lido, and we like the strand.
That was really, I think, the catalyst. It was never really the same after that. And I think Eno felt he was being ousted, and he beat them to it in the end by saying, okay, look, I'm resigning. He left Roxy Music. And he left it in jubilation. I mean, once he made that decision, he ran out singing.